You are listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my regular weekly guests, and we are all here to share the research, the science, and the strategies, as well as some of the fun, to help you to create a more active life. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and another Sarah, Sarah Park, who is also known as the Disability Diva. Sarah is in her 40s, she's based in the UK, and she, in her words, gracefully navigates life with a lifelong disability. And she's absolutely passionately dedicated to advocating for the rights and inclusion of disabled individuals, making sure that people's voices are heard and valued. She collaborates with disabled individuals to help enhance their independence and boost confidence. And Sarah also actively engages with businesses, with entrepreneurs, with corporate bodies to promote awareness about disability inclusion from her, not just her perspective, but her perspective of working with so many people over many years. So she's really committed to bringing about positive societal changes, business changes, and everything. And, you know, one of the reasons she's here today is we're going to be talking about something that actually I had a blog published a couple of weeks ago about the fitness industry in particular, because around 24% of the population of the UK have a disability, yet 43% are inactive, which is double the amount of non-disabled people, able-bodied people. So there is a major discrepancy there to start with. And one of the things we're going to talk about is maybe why that is, but also what we can do. I'm saying we as the sort of fitness industry, what we can do to change this, to actually encourage more people to come in. And for me, one of the things is the difference between accessibility and inclusivity. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're so passionate about this, because I know you've got some personal experience.
So I'm just so passionate because I've had so many challenging experiences where I've not been able to participate in kind of your everyday type fitness, and especially at this time of year where you're getting people, you're going to be getting all of the gym memberships coming out for the new year and all of that sort of stuff. And I've been to gyms and I've tried to be involved, but the reality is that the way that you're treated isn't. It's just not good. It's not good enough. So yeah, for me, it just, there's a lot that needs to be changed because it's not just about physical accessibility. It's about the treatment of people, and very much in everything that I do, it's about around the customer service and the behaviours of others, because as a person with a disability, I learn to get on with it the best I can, but there are loads of experiences where I just haven't had those opportunities because of other people's attitudes towards it.
And it's such a difficult one, isn't it? Because, you know, from the point of view of a fitness instructor, there is a course out there, I run a course, that will give you some information, some practical application skills in working with people with different disabilities. But it's not a one-size-fits-all, obviously. But it's also so important, isn't it, to work with the person who's coming to you for fitness, because it's not a question of, oh, right, this person's in a wheelchair, this person's got an amputation, this person's got CP. There's so much more to it than that because there are so many different grades. And I know from talking to Sam James from Inclusivit before, she has CP and she is a very highly qualified fitness instructor. And one of the reasons she became an instructor was because she couldn't find anybody who really understood how important it was to work with her and to try things out. And I think sometimes that's something we forget, isn't it? It's like, oh, well, it's going to be quite tricky. But actually, you know, let's figure out what we can't do as well as what we can do. Let's give it a go. And I'm guessing that's what a lot of people want, is not to be told, oh, well, it's not really safe, or we haven't got the equipment, but it's more, okay, well, let's try a few things out. Let's see what works and what doesn't work. The same way you would with anyone.
Exactly. And for me, I've had some positive experiences as well, in that for a while I did um, actually work with a personal trainer who was very proactive in their approach, and they didn't make me feel like they were scared of my disability, which often is how it comes across. And so it it was just, that was a really positive experience, because some of the weird and wonderful ways that he got me kind of active, and some of the adjustments that he'd make and all of that made it a really enjoyable experience. Whereas often when I've been to gyms, and like when you go for your initial kind of look around and initial assessment and stuff, they're scared to, like, that they're going to break me or something, and it's like, no, I'm coming because I want to actually participate. I can participate, so ask me.
And that's really important, isn't it? And I do think, to be fair, a lot of instructors are worried about injuring somebody or causing harm or making something worse. But realistically, if you've lived with a disability for any length of time, you will know the things that you absolutely cannot do. And you can say, that never going to happen. Never, ever going to happen. Whereas the other things, it might be, but this, I'm not sure if I can do that or not. Can we try it safely? Can we build up to it? Can we try to do this first and then see if we can build up to that? And I think this is where that consultation comes in. It's actually in the same way as you'd speak to anybody. What are your goals? What are your aims? What are you doing now? What's your fitness level like? We need to be just asking the same questions, but maybe more in depth because of the disability. Now, one of the reasons I'm really passionate about this is various reasons, family members and things like that. But also, I spent 4 years of my life, 20 years ago, 4 years of my life travelling up and down the length and breadth of England, and to a lesser extent Wales and Scotland, delivering the Level 3 disability training course on behalf of the Inclusive Fitness Initiative. And I was one of a team. There were lots of us doing this. So you can imagine how many courses. I was probably doing 1-2 courses a week. Lots and lots and lots of instructors. And yet that doesn't seem to have carried on. And I know the Activity Alliance, who now are responsible for the Inclusive Fitness Initiative, they accredit centres as being accessible. And that looks not just at the actual building itself, but it looks at staff, qualified instructors and things like that. And out of almost 7,500 facilities within the UK, 67 are accredited. Now, I know there are many more centres that could be accredited, but again, I think it's something people don't really... Do you think it's something people don't think about it until they have to, rather than thinking about it in advance and saying, right, actually, let's do all of this and see what happens, rather than, oh my goodness, somebody in a wheelchair has come along, what do we do now? It could be any disability. Yes. I'm using it with a wheelchair because quite often they're the ones that tend to be more noticeable, shall we say. Not necessarily more severe, but it's more noticeable, and that's what makes people sit up and take notice, isn't it? But do you think it is a question of people almost waiting to need to do something about it rather than anticipating and actually being proactive?
Definitely. And I think that is the biggest problem or biggest challenge that I'm experiencing in all of the work that I do in all areas of society. So in hospitality, in retail, in the fitness industry, people react to what's going on rather than being proactive. And so people will make changes, businesses make changes to their business because there's been a problem, because someone has arrived in a wheelchair and wants to kind of come in on a regular basis, they then realise that their toilet's not accessible, for example, and so that they will then look to make the changes. Whereas actually, for disabled people, we've got to the point where we don't even turn up at these places because we know that we're not going to get the service that we need, and the service that everybody should be expecting.
So it's like these are conversations that are just not happening, aren't they? And I think, a lot of disabled people just don't bother because they think, oh, well, it's not going to be okay for me. And a lot of centres don't bother because they said, well, we haven't found a need for it. And I know I approached a very large leisure trust about this training in particular, and they sort of said, well, to be honest, we don't really have a need for it. And I thought, well, do you actually not have a need for it, or is it because people have just not asked? Is there no consultation? Have you not actually spoken to people and maybe done some sort of consultation exercise with local disability groups and sort of said, have you got people that would come in if they knew that there was somebody here who could help them? And do you think that's something we need to be doing more, is actually approaching leading disability groups in advance rather than waiting to be approached?
100%. And it's also about, if you are an accessible venue, for example, if you have already done the work, it's about advertising that fact and being proud of that as well, because actually one of the things that I find is that even if a venue, for example, of any description is accessible, if you're not putting it where everyone goes to the internet now, it's the whole Google this, and you want to be able to actively find positive information related to their businesses kind of way of how they do things. And it's obvious when they've not put any thought into it, because it's not on their website. They've not spoken to the real disabled people out there. And it's like, even down to the physical accessibility of somewhere. You can tell when it's an able-bodied person who has designed the ramp, for example, or the layout of an accessible toilet, because they're not doing it from a wheelchair. They're not doing it from different types of disabilities. They're doing it from an able-bodied perspective.
Because you've got to look at manoeuvrability of wheelchairs. It's not just the size, is it? It's manoeuvrability as well. Having had a few moments with my dad and his wheelchair in very, very narrow. Yeah, we won't go down that route. He was an amputee as well. So but in actual fact, a couple of places have said, gosh, actually, we do need to think about this, because we hadn't realised it was a problem, because we hadn't thought actually people need to come in and turn. It's not always practical to be able to go in and out one way. And this is where I think, there could be a lot more in the sort of sense of PR is just to collaborate with local disability groups. And most local newspapers are always looking for feel-good stories. And this would be an absolutely brilliant one to get out there and say, look, not only do we think our venue is accessible, but actually we've invited all these groups to come in and they've made suggestions. They've told us what's working. They've told us what needs to be improved. And we're really working hard to make this place accessible and inclusive. But we encourage more people to come in and give us a go and tell us what they think. Do you think that's something we need to be doing, is actually consulting and asking and saying, come and tell us what we need to do?
Exactly. I'm more likely to go somewhere, whatever the venue or genre is, that has made a point of talking about their accessibility, talking about their inclusive kind of practices, using inclusive language. I'm much more likely to go somewhere like that, where I feel like I'm a valued customer, than somewhere where they might have all of the accessibility mod cons, they may have everything there from a physical perspective. I'd much rather go to somewhere that's still got a little bit of work to do with the physical accessibility if I'm treated with that respect and feel like I'm a valued customer.
Yeah, because it's all very well saying, look, you can get around our facility, you can use any of the machine equipment in the gym, there's lots of stuff there, but if there isn't an instructor there who can actually help you develop a program and work out the way you're going to get to your goals, then it's kind of meaningless. And I know of one place where they were talking about, look, we've got arm bikes and things like that in, and they're really good. And I said, yeah, that's all very well, but actually, if somebody is in an electric wheelchair and can't transfer, they aren't going to be able to use the arm bike because the battery in the wheelchair is in the way, so they won't be able to get close enough. And it's thinking about things like that, isn't it? It's in the same way we always say there's no one size fits all with anyone, but particularly with mobility equipment, wheelchairs, walking frames, and crutches, all sorts of different things. There's a massive range, isn't there? And it's really important not just to think, oh, standard wheelchair, this is fine. It's, have you got one that's wider or more solid or more substantial or heavier? Does it have a battery? And it's taking a lot of that into consideration. The people that are going to know about this are the disability groups, because they live with it. And it's, like I say, 43% of people with a disability are not active. Certainly not active enough to benefit their health. And we know that, inactivity is a major risk factor for many medical conditions. But also we know that a lot of people with disabilities, because of different, what's the word I want? Because of different energy usage, if you like, are at increased risk already. So by not being active, that risk increases. So it's even more of a reason why people want to be active for their health, but also for well-being. Mental health, I think, is another big one, isn't it? Is being active is such an important part of keeping your mental health boosted.
Exactly.
And is that something that's, again, that we need to be talking more about, not just the physical side of it, but also the mental health?
Yes, definitely.
benefits.
And because growing up, with a disability, I was always very keen to want to get involved in sports and be active, but trying to find the groups that I could attend, and groups that I and sessions that I could be a part of properly was always so difficult. And it wasn't until, I suppose, my late teens, early 20s that I started to actually, because I was driving, so I was able to drive longer distances to get to things like wheelchair basketball and stuff like that, that I was able to really experience the joys of team sport and the sort of the social aspect of it, the mental health aspect of it. And it kind of became eye-opening that I missed out on all of that growing up, that actually, because it was so hard to get involved, I wasn't very fit. I wasn't very active. I wasn't mentally very fit either at that point. I was, from a kind of mental health perspective, my mental health was at an all-time low before I started wheelchair basketball, because with that, there's also that kind of joint kind of collective of different people. And actually, one of the things that I would say about wheelchair basketball was that because it was able-bodied people and disabled people in wheelchairs, it kind of gave you that level playing field of and if anything, as the wheelchair user, having the slight upper hand in that.
Gosh, yes.
And it's little things like that where people take it for granted that they can just turn up at a sports venue, participate in different sports that they want to participate in, go round a gym and not have to worry about what equipment they can use, because they can use it. Oh, they might not be able to use it well because of their fitness levels, but they can use them. Whereas for me, it's like I look around somewhere and it's like, well, I can't do that because of whatever X, Y, and Z. And, you then realise that you've got very little you can do. And it highlights again how I'm different. And so especially from a mental health perspective, going in somewhere where you already feel different anyway, to then have it highlighted again and again, you just stop going because it's actually making your mental health worse, not better.
So it's like that inclusion, that inclusion really is so much broader, isn't it, than just having an instructor who can give you a program. It's about much more. It's interesting what you say about sport, though, because we know, I mean, things like wheelchair basketball, wheelchair rugby are, rapidly growing sports and very, very promoted. But for a lot of people, I think, who are interested in that, they don't have, and they're aware, they don't have the fitness level or strength to just turn up and take part. And this is where I think, again, we need a lot more fitness and coaching at that sort of, right, let's get fit for wheelchair basketball, for wheelchair rugby, because there's a lot of coaching available at sort of intermediate elite level. But actually, for people who want to get into the sport but don't know, again, that's something I think would be much more inclusive. And like you say, when you mix it up by having able-bodied people in wheelchairs, they realise, A, how difficult it is generally, but also they're at a distinct disadvantage because they're not familiar with how. And I've seen, and most of the accidents I've seen have been people who are not used to a wheelchair because they haven't got that tipping point right as much as anything, and they can't get back up again quickly. If they do. But do you think there's a need not just then for fitness and physical activity, but kind of almost preparation for sport, sort of build your fitness to participate in sport? Definitely. Is that something that would help with social?
Yes, definitely. And it's like, obviously I'm now in my 40s, so my experience of sport when I was younger compared to now, there's obviously changes have been made, but I've had conversations just this week with parents of children who have disabilities, and they're still experiencing exactly the same challenges that I experienced growing up as a person with a disability. And it shouldn't be the case 40 years on that people are still having to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours just to get their child to participate in sport.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, isn't it? It's like we're not given the same opportunities, and so we're at a disadvantage in the first place.
It's interesting because a friend of mine has a son with CP, cerebral palsy, and he is involved with the local boxing school, and he does a lot. And she said they're absolutely amazing with him. They really adapt and include all the way along. And it's whenever she talks about it, people are like, "Oh gosh, that's amazing." And I always want to say, no, it's not amazing. It's what should be. We should be commenting on the times it's not available, not praising people for when it is. And we need to make it much more normal, because actually everybody benefits. Yes. Everybody benefits. Children benefit, adults benefit. Adults who have a child with a disability will benefit from seeing other children very much hugely involved. But kids will learn, and they'll just accept differences. Whatever the difference is, they'll be much more accepting of differences because that's just what's happening around them. And I think, again, it's we've got to start somewhere. And even if we just start with, getting people fitter, and then start promoting sport, it happens. But it's like you say, if you've got to drive for an hour and a half to get somewhere, that might be all very well in the summer and, you've got more energy, but certainly in dark winter days and you've been working all day, it's kind of like, no, I can't be bothered. And so we need much more local opportunities. And for me, this is where leisure centres could really come in, particularly the ones that have got a big sports hall or studio. Is say, right, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to put on some get fit for wheelchair basketball, get fit for wheelchair rugby. Even if we're not playing the sport, we're doing the exercises, we're doing the movements, we're doing the activity that will help people to get fitter. And I'm sure a lot of the able-bodied wheelchair or rugby groups, basketball or rugby groups would be more than keen to come along and help out and give it a go, because I think sport is a very, very inclusive environment, but it's one where we need to be including people, not just by saying, like you're saying about, here's an accessible venue, come along. It's actually, here's an accessible venue that we've worked with different groups to make more accessible. So it needs to be, right, this is what we're thinking of doing. Don't just suddenly put a poster up and say, hello, anybody who has CP or spina bifida or whatever, come along to this. It's, let's talk to you. Can you come along and consult with us about what you would like us to put on, what you would like us to provide, how we can support you. Start with a consultation. Include people right from the start, because that's, I think, sometimes what's missing, isn't it? And it's actually possibly the key between being successful in attracting people and not. So what would your recommendations be to people who are thinking, well, actually, as a fitness facility, yeah, we do need to get more people involved with disabilities, with medical conditions, whatever. But what would your advice be?
Well, as we've already said, it needs to be that they are communicating with diverse people and getting advice and speaking about the different kind of areas that need to be focused on. And actually, again, in terms of some of the challenges that I experience, from my perspective of approaching venues to have these conversations, again, it's about they're not being proactive in their approach, they're being reactive. And so it's just, be proactive, search out the people who can support you. There are lots of us out there who are more than happy to come in, have a chat with you, speak about what it is that's really needed. Because as I've said before, I'm more likely to go somewhere who's made me feel like I'm a valued member of their customer base than when no one's bothered to even ask me who I am or how I am or what I need or anything. I'm not going to go there.
And so it's a question really of, don't wait for disabled people to come to you to make suggestions. It's go and find people with various disabilities or impairments and say, right, can you come in and tell us what we're doing right and what needs to be improved? Because that's what's going to draw people in. Because you're like, if somebody does that, approaches you, and I'll make sure all your links are within the podcast. But if somebody approaches you and says, look, can you come in and have a really good look at this and tell us how we're doing, tell us what we can improve, you're more likely to say to people, God, that centre's been really, really good about including people. Yeah, I would definitely recommend them. And this is where, and it's that word of mouth. We all know that word of mouth is such an important kind of PR thing, isn't it? We always think of PR as being newspapers and magazines and TV, but actually word of mouth, people saying, yeah, they're really good, they really think, or they've got people there who can really help you and support you. I think that's something that is important, isn't it? Is because that's word spreads.
Because this is the thing, is that going back to something you said about how they've said, oh, there's not a need, and many disabled people won't tell you that they're disappointed that they're not able to participate, because we've got so used to that being the norm that actually, if you, as a business, went that extra mile and actually made a point of it being part of your ethos, being part of what you do, no matter what, your reputation is going to grow, which means you are going to get more customers coming in, and it helps everyone. If you improve your customer service and how you deal with people, it helps everyone. It's not just about the individuals with a disability you're helping.
This is it, isn't it? And I was just going to say, this isn't just about Sarah Park saying, oh, right, I'm going to go there because it's really good. It's about your friends, your family members, your contacts, your connections saying, oh, right, okay. Oh, yeah, that's really good to know. I'll go there. So it isn't just about providing more inclusivity and inclusiveness, if you like, for disabled people. It's about all of their connections saying, actually, yeah, I will go there because they're doing good. And I like that. And I think that's important because I think one of the things I did want to talk about is, what do you think some of the, we have kind of touched on it, but when it comes to working with disabled people, what are some of the misconceptions that you think exist within the fitness and activity fields?
Capabilities is a big thing that I'm always kind of, people get scared. They will start wrapping you up in cotton wool, being really worried that you're going to hurt yourself, that we're going to sue them because we've hurt ourselves, all of those different things. And so they're thinking that my disability means that I'm completely incapable, that I potentially can't think for myself. That's a big one in general society, where mentally, just because I'm in a wheelchair, assumptions are made around your ability to make decisions, your ability to communicate, your ability to be able to advocate for yourself. People make the assumption that you can't, even though just because I've got a physical disability doesn't mean that I'm incapable.
I know, I've seen that so many times, the assumption that it's almost like they assume that your brain's in your legs, and if you can't use your legs, then your brain's somehow. And let's face it, talking about capabilities, you're a qualified PADI diver, aren't you?
Yes.
So, talking about capability, you dive, which most people think, oh, but if you can't use your legs, you can't dive. Well, actually, yes, you can.
And actually, using that one as the example, I've got my advanced PADI, and I've done all of the same training. I've had to do it to the same level, but actually, you can still tell, certain, when I've been diving with external people who don't know me, make assumptions over ability. They've wanted, even if you're in a big group, they want you to go with the instructor. They want you to only dive to kind of a low amount, and they'll make assumptions on my ability just because of my physical disability. And that's actually why I love going in a group, where that one's concerned, because actually others can advocate for me. Because that is the other thing, as people with who live with disability, we do struggle to advocate for ourselves if we're not feeling like we're being heard. And so that's also part of why I'm now passionate about sharing my experiences and sharing my knowledge for other disabled people, because they don't feel like they can.
So what we can all do then, all of us, disabled, able-bodied, whatever, is talk more, communicate, ask questions, listen to the answers on both sides. It's a two-way process, communication. And I think sometimes there is an assumption that if there is a need, people will come forward and say, hello, there's a need for this. Why aren't we going out and asking, is there a need for this? Why aren't we saying, right, let's change this. Let's ask people why they're inactive. Is it because they're lazy? Unlikely. Or is it because there is no local and accessible and inclusive opportunity that they're aware of, and also for centres that do have very, very inclusive opportunities, how are you getting that message across? Communicate that message to local groups, to the local press. Don't just sit there and say, well, we've got all of this and we've got all this equipment, we've got these instructors, but no one's coming. It's possibly because nobody knows. Tell people.
I've had business owners say this to me, that, well, we've made it all accessible. We've got all accessible facilities, but we never get people with disabilities. And I'm like, but have you mentioned that on your social media? Have you mentioned it on your website? Have you spoken about it? Have you done a press release in newspapers about it? And their answer is always no. And so I'm like, well, why would we assume that you're accessible when, sadly, it's not the norm? And until things like inclusion and accessibility become part of the norm, people with disabilities are going to continue to feel like they're left out and that they're second rate citizens, and that no one actually cares about us, because until it's the norm, we will always be different. We will always have that divide between normal and not normal. Whatever normal
actually,
is.
it is normal. Let's be honest. There's let's not get into debate about what's normal. But the thing is that disability isn't just being in a wheelchair or having something like cerebral palsy. It could be severe osteoarthritis. It could be severe depression. So there's any number of reasons why somebody may, be disabled. But again, it's that communication, isn't it? It's talking to people, asking people, and really, it is that consultative process on both sides. It isn't enough to say, well, if people come, then we'll adapt. It's no, let's adapt and then shout about it and get people to know. So what would be your main message then on disability inclusion and inclusiveness in fitness and beyond, activity, sport, all sorts?
It's about making sure that you're communicating, that you are thinking about the different people. You're not just aiming your sport to able-bodied people. You are looking to get communities involved in all areas of what you do, because until that happens, we're never going to be fully inclusive. It's just, for me, I always feel like it's a bit of a no-brainer, but then people it's just one of those things, isn't it? It's like, well, surely it should be as it is.
But the thing is, I think it actually is easy as long as you're talking, as long as both sides are talking and saying, right, what can we do to help you become more active? And that might be access to, but it's much more likely to be the infrastructure, the culture, the behaviour of everybody, isn't it, around there? It's being much more welcoming. It's being much more questioning, not assumptive. It's asking questions. Okay, so what can you do, rather than what can't you do? And of the things that you can't do, is that because of the disability, it's never going to happen? Or is it because you are inactive and actually it's kind of made your function less? So again, it's don't assume, talk for me. And this is where I think I just wish, as an industry, we'd really start to push more to get people more active, not even necessarily getting them into the gym, but, look at what other activities you can do. Do you run health walks from around? Are they suitable for somebody in a wheelchair? Is there opportunity to maybe do much shorter ones for people who use crutches or a frame? Isn't it? It's thinking, okay, what have we got on offer? What are we not offering that might actually help? Because you might sort of say, right, we've got a lovely walk that's wheelchair accessible, but if people don't know about it, they won't. But other people might sort of say, oh, well, actually, that sounds like it might be okay for me. I'm not at all fit. I haven't got a disability, but I'm really unfit. But that sounds good. Mm-hmm. I know there's a lake in Colorado near Estes Park, which is up in the Rockies, and they've actually Sprague Lake. They've actually designed a walkway around it, which is completely wheelchair accessible. Mm-hmm. Around this lake it's at 8,000-9,000 feet up, and it's absolutely spectacular. But of course, it means that it isn't just people in wheelchairs that can use it. It's people who aren't very fit, people who are affected by the altitude. By making things more accessible, more inclusive, it's not just disability, is it, that we're including? It's anyone who is unfit or has a health condition. And I think this is, this isn't just saying we must include more disabled people. It's saying let's just generally, let's be more inclusive. And I think is that something that we really want to get out there. Is this isn't about including a specific group. It's about including everybody.
Exactly. And if you start making changes that are going to benefit people with disabilities, you will be benefiting everyone. And, there's so many different abilities out there, whether you've got a disability or not. And so and again, this comes down to what's sort of out there for people to access. If you're able-bodied, you can access some level of sport or fitness from a very young age right through to kind of elderly, and there's everything in between throughout that time for you to be able to access. But with people with disabilities, there's massive gaps in what is being offered, and that's where some of this needs to improve as well, in terms of actually having that access to a variety of different activities.
So don't just wait until you fall into a gap. Actually get out there and look for the gaps. It's really important. And I will say as well, don't forget, there are a lot of people with disabilities out there who are incredibly fit and strong. So, we're not saying everybody who has a disability is unfit and inactive, but we are saying that a lot of them are, and a lot more than people who don't have a disability. So, I would say to anybody, and that's anyone who works within the fitness field, whether you're a big leisure trust or just a one-man personal trainer or you run group exercise, really think, okay, what can I do to make what I offer more accessible? Number one, I'm going to go and find some people to talk to and ask them. And I would start there. Before you do anything, talk to people and see what they want, see what they need, because I think that will change. It will change your business, really.
And stop making assumptions.
Exactly. Don't make assumptions. Ask the questions. Don't assume people can't do anything. Don't assume they can. Talk to people in the same way you would with any other client. Yeah, really important. Sarah, thank you so much for coming along. Do you have a final message then for anybody who is disabled, who wants to get more active, or anybody who works within the activity field and is kind of thinking, okay, what's my next step?
You can come and find me. I do actually have a Facebook group as well, which Sarah's going to put the link in for us. So come and find me in the group. That's for small to medium-sized business owners. But if you've got a disability yourself, you can come along because the group's all about raising awareness, having the conversations, and actually learning from each other. So yeah, please come along to that.
That's the Disability Inclusion Business Network.
Exactly.
I'll make sure it's all in the information.
Yes.
But the Disability Inclusion Business Network. I was going to say, if you want to find Sarah, it's a little bit easier because she is the disability diva.
Yes.
Which I just think is brilliant. But, you know, if you're going to be a diva about something, let's be a diva about inclusiveness, because it's so important, isn't it?
Exactly.
So a final message then for people who are listening.
Just to be communicating and be part of the change, be part of making the world an inclusive space.
Brilliant. You've been listening to me, Sarah Bolitho, and my guest this week, Sarah Park, talking all about how we can make fitness, activity and sport, actually, we talked about, more inclusive for people with any kind of disability. Thank you for listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Bolitho, and my guests. Join me each week for more on how to create and sustain everyday activity, and follow me online at Fitness Career Mentor or Fabulous if you're interested in career development and more on creating active lifestyles.